So, as we all know, there are different types of intelligence, but most of us haven't studied the concept much beyond that level of depth. Nevertheless, in the next few years in particular, we are really going to need to revisit and revise our common understandings of intelligence in order to keep up with and become a more accurate reflection of its evolving nature. So in this video, I'm going to talk about what intelligence means now, which conceptions of it are no longer really accurate or complete or doing any real work for us, and also what we should be looking for and what kinds of intelligence we should want to surround ourselves with and also cultivate within. So you might be wondering, well, why is this important? Why focus on intelligence? The immediate answer, of course, is that, as I just said, we no longer have a useful or coherent or accurate understanding of this concept in the sense that it's incomplete. And in the sense of what it should be pointing to, which again is evolving. And the larger answer, the deeper answer is that I think that if you're interested in having genuine agency in your life going forward, all of us, we need to cultivate the evolution of our own intelligence, and in order to recognize it properly around us, to respond appropriately and in an aligned way, and in a way that can help your own alignment. So this is really about being able to read the collective room. Now, this might still sound a little bit abstract, but on the other hand, I also don't want to come across as sounding like I'm trying to instill fear in anyone. But the fact is that we are on the edge right now of a real threshold, of a powerful threshold where it's really the intersection of several powerful social trajectories. And I feel that our understanding of intelligence is at the heart of this, or will be at the heart of what's affected by this. And now, historians, of course, can tell you that we're always on the threshold of something, which is true. But the content and like the stakes of each threshold are very specific. And also in different spiritual communities right now, we have a lot of talk about timelines. And this is usually presented as a simple split. Like there's one fork in the road and you can go like up or down or left or right or something. So it's always true, though, that we're on the precipice of something meaningful, which often takes the form of going past a kind of point of no return. That's what we're registering when we talk in this way. But nevertheless, that we that's involved in there is very multiple. There are many we's. And so there are many different timelines that are already active for different groups and communities. So when someone starts talking about some of these changes coming and they talk about whether some people are going to adapt or whether some will ascend to a higher timeline, we have to just keep in mind that this isn't a homogeneous field or set of choice points. I don't think so. It's obviously differentiated, it's differential like everything else. And so one person's idea of adapting or taking an adaptive path in the sense of the Darwinian framework of, not being left behind, not taking some maladaptive action, is what another person might see as actually continuing on a lower timeline. So this is where it gets really nuanced and you need to put the categories into proper perspective. And so this is where we really need to use our own discernment. And guess what? That's a component of intelligence. So that's one component of intelligence, but along with several others. And I think that the issue we're facing is that historically, intelligence has been identified with just one or two of these components. And it depends each time on the context in which these are defined and used. But genuine intelligence, the kind that we really want when we want to describe something with this concept, is obviously multifaceted and it's highly integrated across these facets. And this makes it coherent and holistic. So here you can see we might already be talking about some kind of spectrum where maybe we have one component of intelligence on one side versus a fully developed or integrated form of understanding on the other. So let's just start by like listing out a lot of these components, and then we'll have a list of what integrated intelligence is not, because many of these are handled separately, they're isolated, they're reductive, and once you can isolate it, well, you can manipulate it individually, and that's not what intelligence is about. So for example, intelligence is not the same thing as just having information. It's not the same thing as having a stored body, storage of true beliefs about reality. It's more than just relational awareness, like the boundary of myself and the boundary of someone else and my environment. And it's more than being able to make adaptive behavioral choices. The earliest robots were doing this in the first cybernetic programs. And it's definitely a lot more than being able to quickly carry out a set of logical instructions. That was another reductive program for what human cognition is all about. Started in the 1940s. Nothing special there. We can transfer it into other systems. That's not intelligence. That's not integrated. And it's more than having just the ability to recognize patterns and make predictions on that basis. So can you see the pattern here? Can you already notice or intuit what I haven't mentioned, what's not, what hasn't been registered yet in this picture? I'll just give you a second to think, to notice that. The thing is that we can only recognize what we've already cultivated or met with within ourselves. And that in itself is one model of recognition. It's an internal, highly self-aware model. There are other models for what recognition means that are rather externalized, and I would say they're not grounded in being, the fullness of being. What they're grounded in is positive presence. This is very different than being. And so, for example, we can talk about pattern recognition again. This is an externalized type of recognition. We might even consider it reactive rather than productive. We can use it to make predictions, but so what? That just shows that we've learned to apply like one thread of baby logic, basically, and it's not in itself very impressive. It's not what I would call a developed form of intelligence. It's just knowing what a given code is and when to apply it and how to recognize a given variable in relation to that code. That's all that is. And so, but if you weren't able to do any kind of advanced pattern recognition, though, like that might look really smart. So let's take an example here. Let's look at basic counting. That's an example of applied pattern recognition. Yet it's already adhering to some basic rules. And we've learned these and internalized them, so it's not really that special for us. It's easy to know what comes next after 1022, 1023. But what if you update the rules? So now let's count this sequence and you can tell me what the next number is. 1022, 1044, 1066. You take a second and you think about it, but then it's pretty easy to figure it out, right? But now let's just make this a slightly higher dimensional. It's not even high dimensional yet, but let's change just two of the parameters. And then you can tell me the answer in the comments here. So let's count 1022, 1506, 1484, 1968. Now tell me what the next number in the sequence is. Actually, tell me the pattern, tell me the formula, don't just tell me the number. So changing only two parameters, though, this is not even complex yet. This is not high dimensional, which is when we'd be changing, once we start getting up into like 8 parameters, 10 parameters, that's when we need like these like super powered computers just to like solve these things. But all of this is still just advanced pattern recognition. It's just having like a set of knives, for example, and you could have like 10 different types of knives, but they'd all still be doing the work of a knife with slight variations. That's not a full toolbox. That's not a full studio or workshop. Like if all you have is a really good collection of knives. So I think you can see where the logic of this point is going. So let's return back to our question, like what is intelligence? And what are we saying now when we care about asking that question? What is intelligence now? So advanced pattern recognition again can look impressive if we're able to do it faster on with more logical switching, or if we keep more forms of memory active for the processing of more variables. But can you see how these are all like individual isolated functions, and we're just like adjusting these like tracks on a mixer? There's nothing in here yet about integration. Now, even if there's emergent behavior, that's not necessarily anything to do with intelligence, because you can create emergent behavior with any three things that you can bring together into a chaotic system. That's like the minimum set that you need. So emergent behavior, emergent properties in itself is not necessarily all that exciting. And there's nothing in there about integration. Integration, though, itself implies a lot more than just our concept of learning, which is what's often touted as like the peak quality of general intelligence. But if that's all intelligence is, some ability for self-directed learning, we already see like that doesn't get us very far. Most humans are born with the capacity for self-directed learning. So that's not enough for developing higher and more expensive qualities, you could say, than, for example. And so what I would propose right now as our new like placeholder understanding of intelligence is something more like the adaptive capacity to understand and organize sensible material, and in accordance with intuitive direction. Now, even here, we can already start to argue whether this capacity for intuitive reception is really an aspect of intelligence, or if it's the result of the integration of intelligence, for example, with deeper levels of consciousness. Now, I haven't talked about consciousness yet on purpose, but long story short, it's much larger and more fundamental than simply phenomenal perception. It's not about having perceptual awareness. That's just what perception is. So I'd almost say that we should think about consciousness more in terms of its capacity for integration. For example, integrating perception, integrating intelligence. But as you know, based on the patterns we've already seen here, I'm guessing integration itself is still just one facet of consciousness. So let me know your own views if this raised any questions for you, and I hope I've inspired in you also the need for deepening and cultivating our awareness of intelligence, especially in today's context. So I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you in the comments.